Welcome, everybody, to Into the Woods. This is the bonus podcast for patrons, and this week we're doing something a little bit unique. I am going to go ahead and publish this for everybody. This is just a special treat for the spooky season as we're getting closer to Halloween. I know there's been a lot of new listeners to the podcast over the last couple of weeks, and I'm really excited about that. I'm glad you're all here, and I wanted to give you newcomers a taste of what we're doing over on the Patreon in case that might be of interest to you, and just as a fun way to kind of do a little audience Q&A in the Patreon, which I'll talk about a little bit more in detail here in a second. I have these community chats set up where people can ask me questions. I will oftentimes respond directly there in the chat, but I'll also answer some questions on these bonus episodes as well. Let's just get this out of the way real quick too. If you can't tell, my voice is still recovering from being sick last week. I am feeling much better finally after a couple straight weeks of just misery. Finally doing better, but my voice is still lagging behind. So apologies for how I sound. My mouth is also very dry because of this. So I'm kind of working through that. But we have a monster episode here to get through. So I'm going to stay strong, do my best. I've got my coffee with me, recording in the morning for once, so I can actually get caffeinated while I'm sitting here. And we're going to dig into it. If you are already a patron and you are listening to this either on Patreon or however, you could probably skip the next 30 seconds or so. I'm just going to do a quick explanation of what we do in the Patreon, and then we'll get to this normal story discussion. So if you are still listening, you're a new listener, you are a longtime listener that's just curious, on the Patreon, which is $4.99 a month, we have the normal stories come out every week, but they come out early. You get them midnight on Tuesday nights / Wednesday morning, Central Standard Time. And that's just a little perk of being a patron. You get the episode early. You get it ad-free, so no interruptions. And you also get, along with that, a PDF of the story that you can print out or share with friends or whatever. I ask that you don't do anything, over the top, sharing it for your own personal gain. When I provide that story to you, it's just there really for you to use at your own discretion. But so I know some people like to read, or I've had people say that they like to read stories to their friends, or just, they want to email the story to their friend or something like that, but they don't listen to podcasts, whatever. There's a PDF. We also do this show, this Into the Woods show, where every week I talk about the story from that week. A lot of times it's kind of a play-by-play. I try to avoid just doing a play-by-play, here's what happened, because you all just listened to the story if you're listening to this. So that doesn't seem necessary. I try to talk about the stuff that I was thinking about while writing it, the inspiration, any other little helpful bits of advice that I have for other writers and things like that. And then, also like I tend to be a little bit ambiguous in my stories. So I address some of those mysteries and maybe give you some insight into where I personally fall on those things. So, and this, this week's story will be a perfect example of that, where we are doing that very thing today. All of those things that I just mentioned, actually, we'll be doing. And then let's see, what else on the Patreon? Yeah, you get early access, ad-free episodes. You get the bonus show. Oh, the community chats. You'll also be in the community chats with us. We have a Q&A one where you can just kind of introduce yourself and, meet other patrons. And then we have one where we discuss the latest story. So that's what's going on there. If you're interested, there is a 7-day free trial that you're welcome to check out. It should give you full access as if you are a paid member. So check that out for 7 days. Binge all of the, Into the Woods episodes that you want to catch up on or whatever, and then cancel it if you want. It doesn't really matter. Patreon is just kind of a way for me to create an additional community for fans of the Morning Woods. And I appreciate the support. I really do. Genuinely, everyone in there, I appreciate you very much. So this week, the episode is going to be a little bit different because of what we're doing with this public episode here. I posted on Instagram a little over a week ago asking for general questions for a Q&A, and then I also posted it in Patreon to gather some questions there. And because of that, we have a long list of questions to get to that I'm pretty excited about. We're going to save that to the end, though, because the way these episodes are normally structured, we do a story deep dive. I give you some podcast updates, which we will keep extremely brief this week, and then the personal updates, which is when I also do Q&A type stuff. So without further ado, let's jump into the story discussion. And I have already had to pause to rest my voice, so this might be interesting. All right, well, let's just start at the beginning here. Like I said, I'm going to try not to do too much of a play-by-play here, but we're going to have to do a little bit of that just to get on the same page. Let's just start at the introduction. I was personally very proud of this introduction. It's hard sometimes to write the first sentence of a story. That can often be the trickiest part, besides maybe the last sentence. Figuring out what note to end on can be difficult. But starting the first sentence is tricky, but then just crafting an introduction that is both sets the stage for the rest of the story and captivates the interest of the listener. That can always be a challenge. And this week, for some reason, it just wasn't. This one came together. It flowed really well, I thought. And I'm not trying to be arrogant here. This is just, I'm sharing my experience of writing this story. That's kind of what I do on these deep dives. It doesn't always go this well. And this one it did. I think I managed to give you an idea of what was going on, setting the stage for the new neighbor moving in. But we also learned so much about the individual characters and the dynamics between them. We're introduced to Ethan, who is clearly a guy who's had some struggles in the past that have led to the end of his relationship with the mother of his children. But he seems to be kind of getting on the right track. He's trying to work his way back into her good graces so that he can be a bigger part of his kids' lives. He really seems motivated to do that. She seems willing to give him that chance. However, she maybe doesn't see things the same way he does. She seems to not quite share the same perspective as him as far as how close they are to reuniting. He's even throwing out the possibility of him moving in with them, and she's kind of like, yeah, hold your horses, buddy. We're not quite there yet. So we just kind of learn that whole dynamic from this opening scene, and we also learn about Greg, the gecko, which was a present from Ethan, the dad, to his sons. And Greg might seem like an inconsequential part of this scene, but obviously if you've heard the whole story, which I'd highly recommend before you listen to this episode, you know that Greg ends up playing a pretty important role as we go forward. The kids seem to want the parents together. It's not explicitly said, but especially Calvin, the younger one, he seems pretty excited by the idea that his mom and dad might be in love again. So that's nice. It also, like I said, just kind of gives us an idea of where everyone's at emotionally as we kick off this story. So let's get to the first interaction then with the old woman who moves in behind. Initially, they think she's the sole new neighbor that they've gained in this little exchange. And we don't ever hear her name. She's never given a name. And that's something I realized kind of towards the end, that I'd never named her. And I briefly considered coming up with something for her. But I think by not naming her, it almost it lends itself to the way Annie has hidden her away. Like it's almost like Annie has tried to just shove her in this little room upstairs where she can sleep all day and do nothing. And she's basically just waiting for her to disappear. And so by not giving her a name, we kind of feel that as the audience, like she's a very important character, right? Like she plays multiple key roles in this story, but yet she's not really given much of a spotlight in a strange way too. I guess I kind of maybe is reflective of how I feel about a lot of older people in our society. And as I get a little bit older too and realize just in my short life, I'm 28, and I think back on myself as a teenager and how much I've learned since then, I extrapolate on that and I think about, how much hopefully I'll have learned and know by the time I'm in my 60s, 70s, 80s. And realizing that by the time I'm that old, young people will probably have completely discredited anything I have to say. I see that happening right now amongst people my age. And that's something that's always kind of given me pause. And it's not something that I've found any sort of way to like take action on in my day-to-day life, but it's a theme that I've explored here before too. How we kind of, at least in American culture, I think we sort of discount the value of older citizens of this nation. Anyway, little tangent there. I did write out myself some very detailed notes here to prevent myself from going completely off topic, and already that doesn't feel like it's working too well. So let's get back to the notes. All right, so this first interaction with this old lady is kind of weird, right? We don't know what's going on yet with her. And if you are, the person who's listening to this and that fell into the trap of believing that this lady is going to end up being the snake witch that's mentioned in the title, well then good. My writing did its trick. The whole point, I was trying to misdirect and mislead here a little bit. So we have this weird interaction. She's just out the gate weirdly angry at these young boys, telling them to get away from her yard, even though they're not even, the fence is separating them. She's not in any danger. They're not trespassing, but she's warning them away very angrily and hostilely. And then, there's this weird thing with the crickets. They start jumping against the glass and killing themselves. So that was initially when I had the idea to do that, it was just kind of a tropey horror thing to do. It was a creepy thing. Nothing really scary had happened yet in the story, and I wanted to get a good hook in you as the listener by creating this disturbing kind of visual of these crickets killing themselves against the glass and their pus oozing out of their eyes and stuff. And then as the rest of the story kind of came together and we see Annie has some control over animals, at least reptiles, and that there's this link between her and her mom, like there might be this hereditary power passed down. I think it stands to reason that maybe the old lady was controlling the crickets to do this. However, I don't think she was doing it on purpose. There's this moment where Annie, when they're upstairs towards the end, where the old woman is stepping through this mess from the shattered light fixture, and the glass is moving away from her feet, and Annie's surprised, and she asks, "How are you doing that?" How are you doing that again? I think is directly what she says, implying that she knows her mother has these powers, but there's been a gap. Like she doesn't think her mother still has the ability to use the powers, and she's surprised to see that. So maybe when the crickets are killing themselves, because that is the only moment in the story where this old woman causes any harm to a living creature besides cutting Graham's hand, which I don't even think was her intention, but we'll get to that in a second. I think it's safe to assume that she was struggling to get a grip on her powers again. Like she was trying to turn them back on or however it would work. And in that process of casting this mental control over this glass jar, she accidentally causes these crickets to just go insane and start hitting against the glass, and they're dying there. And then she finally gets it, and the jar shatters and cuts Graham. Now, of course, hurting Graham, it could kind of tell you that maybe she is a little more sinister than the picture painted of her towards the end of the story. However, I would push back on that. I think by giving him some minor cuts, even Maggie, his mother, as she's bandaging him, acknowledges that they're not that bad. They don't need stitches. They're going to heal fine. And later she says the same thing to Ethan, that maybe that was just a warning. It was a warning shot from this old woman because she knows how much worse the situation could be if these boys were not adequately scared of the house and the secrets within. Let's see, where are we at? Let's say this whole interaction though with the glass jar and everything. That's what triggers Ethan into action, which is kind of what sparks the real action of this story. So Ethan finds out that this happens at some point over the weekend when he's got the kids. He brings them back, and he's outraged that Maggie has not confronted this old woman who injured their son, right? Because he's trying to be this alpha protector, and I think he's struggling with that because he has to be that figure at a distance. He gets the weekends, but other than that, we kind of get the sense that he's away from the kids. So he learns of this harm that has come to his son when he's not around, and he's just feeling like he needs to react to it. I don't think that's a healthy way necessarily to handle it, but that's where Ethan's at. He feels this need, and even as Maggie kind of talks him out of it, he's then driving away, and once he's by himself and he's talking to himself, he works himself up again, and he goes, nope, I need to go handle this. So he goes to the house, and who answers the door but this beautiful woman, Annie. Did any of you think that Annie was the old woman in disguise at first? As I was writing it, I kind of thought that would be a moment that might misdirect some people. It's hard to say if it was intentional. I didn't think ahead and go, ooh, I know I'll trick everybody. But as it kind of came together, I realized that probably crossed some of your minds, that it was like a Snow White sort of situation. This lady took a new form. That felt a little bit too. I did briefly consider going down that road. And this whole story. Sorry, not to go on another tangent, but this whole story actually, when I had the first idea, which was basically just the old lady and the boys in the yard and this confrontational thing, and then they would be trying to convince their mom that this lady was this evil witch, and she wouldn't be buying it, and then there'd be drama ensuing from that. That was kind of the original thing, and I actually had the entire thing outlined to the point where I thought I was just going to sit down and bust this story out in a couple of days. It was so complete, the outline I had in my head. And then about halfway through, it was when Annie comes to the door with the snake around her neck. I planted the snake there as a device to use later in my original idea of the story. But there was just this moment as I was writing about the snake that this new track opened up in my mind, and I wanted to explore more with the snake. And then eventually that led to the gigantic snake upstairs. So the story, as far as like the general details with the boys losing the gecko and then Graham ending up inside the house getting caught by Annie, all of that was originally in my head. But the motivations were all different and things like that. So I had to kind of rework those things. But that's just a little, if you're a fellow writer or something like that, and you're interested in the process, that's a part of the process. Sometimes those doors just open and you have to go through them to see where they lead. That happens a lot of times, and I end up shutting the door. I look at it and I go, nope, that's not where I want to go. Close the door. But this one, it just felt slightly more exciting than my original idea, so I pursued it. But when I did briefly consider the idea of making Annie and the old woman the same, I kind of thought about the last couple weeks worth of stories that I've had. There was Guilty Conscience, which had a shapeshifter. And then in Corrupted, there was the spirit or whatever it was. It's never really decided in that story what the assailing entity, I guess we'll say, whatever it was that was communicating with the main character, it mimics the voice of the movie director in that story. And I thought just, having another shapeshifter or mimic type thing, I was getting too repetitive. And I try my best to avoid that with these weekly stories. So that was honestly the reason I closed the door on that idea. And I'm really glad I did, because it led to the old woman becoming a more significant character and having a little bit more dynamics with her plot, I guess you could say. Starting to lose my words here real quick. I'm going to take a short break and recover my voice. Okay, I'm back. So we're talking about Annie. When Ethan first shows up at the house, he's surprised to see this beautiful woman. I was picturing Kristen Ritter mostly, who played Jessica Jones in the Marvel series. If anybody saw that, she was kind of my model for this character, Annie. Maybe a little bit Anna de Armas, kind of in there. But the lifeless eyes, no offense to Kristen Ritter at all, she's beautiful. But she has these big eyes that are just kind of serious and heavy. And that's kind of where that whole idea came from. I don't know why I was picturing her. I haven't seen that show in when did it come out? 5 or 6 years ago now, probably. I haven't seen it since then. But for some reason that was just in my mind. So anyway, we now know that there's somebody else in this house who we have not met yet. She's this whole new mysterious character. And she's got this sort of seductive charm. At least that's what she projects to Ethan. It's interesting. Graham is this 13-year-old boy, and there's multiple references to his increased testosterone and the teenage hormones and everything. Yet not once does he express any sort of realization or acknowledgement of this beautiful woman. Now, that could just be the fact that when he interacts with her, he's just scared. Everything is terrifying. She's yanked him into this house. She's dragging him around with this snake. Or it could also be that she just didn't need to turn on that particular charm with him because she already had him captured. She's clearly trying to lure Ethan in. And it's almost like, she doesn't necessarily expect Ethan to come. He comes totally out on his own accord. But when he's there at her doorstep, she has the playbook. She knows how to get him inside, how to get him sipping this tea that she makes that then leads him to being essentially paralyzed for her to feed to her monster upstairs. But we're getting ahead of ourselves slightly. She is a self-professed herbalist, but she does not seem to mind being called a witch. And I actually, I know a lot of people today use the witch label as not a negative thing at all. They call themselves witches, or they're into the lighter side of magic and stuff like that. And that's all fine. But it could also be an indication that she knows she's a darker character than her mother, and she's totally fine with that. Maybe she's excited by being more of the evil side of magic than her mother is. Maybe she's just rebelling. She might be angry at her mother for the type of burden that she's put on her life. And we'll talk a little bit more about the mother here in a minute, but she is probably truly sick, whether it's dementia or Alzheimer's or something like that. She's clearly not well, and maybe Annie does feel like she's weighing down her life. And this is all a very extreme form of rebellion. So that's possible. And I kind of hint at that when Graham is upstairs listening to how she's talking to her mother, and he notices that she sounds more like a spoiled teenager than this violent witch that's holding him hostage. So maybe when she's around her mom, she feels some resentment and expresses that, whether it's intentionally or not. I'd say it's feasible that she's been constantly poisoning her mom on top of her mom's mental illness, whatever it is. That could explain why she's in bed all day, sleeping all day. And, based on what she does to Ethan with the tea, I'd say it's conceivable that she has some other concoction she could make to kind of pacify her mother, either to keep her from spilling the beans on what's upstairs or just to keep her out of the way, so she's not bothering her. I think it's safe to say she's probably using the mom for financial reasons. there's a lot to be implied here, I guess is what I'm getting at. I left quite a bit of mystery when it comes to the old woman and Annie and where they come from. Maybe Annie almost got caught once before. Maybe they came from somewhere where she was also feeding people to her monster python. Maybe she had a close call with a victim. Maybe somebody escaped and they had to flee town. There's a lot to explore, I think, with these characters and their background. But it didn't matter too much to this story. So since it was already, kind of a longer one, we didn't dive too deeply into that. So there's a lot to think about there. And let's talk about this gigantic snake. So if you know much about pythons, which I'm sure some of you do, it would take probably at least a 20-foot python to consume a grown man, probably even bigger than that. There have been reports of pythons up to 23 feet, but not confirmed. Like they don't have the skeleton of a 23-foot python or even like the skin, from being shed by such a snake. There's just been these anecdotal reports of these larger than 20-foot pythons in the past. So here, we're definitely leaning on fiction a little bit with this absolutely enormous python that she's keeping up in this room, that's climbing around on the walls and everything, eating people. So, that's probably not super realistic, but who's to say it's not possible, especially, if you're feeding it grown men. I guess it could probably get pretty big, maybe. Not a whole lot to say else about the snake, to be honest. I hope it was scary, though. I know a lot of people are terrified of snakes. And that's something actually that kind of fascinates me, is this idea of like, getting eaten by a snake. You hear about this happening to people, and it just seems so inconceivable that something that's, snakes are like, they're kind of fast, but they're not, it's not like a tiger or something like that where it could just catch you and hold you and whatever. At least that's what you think. But if you've ever had a snake, like when I was a kid, I was at this birthday party and this guy brought snakes. In hindsight, I would never do this again, and I would never let my kid do it. There's this picture of me, and I have this, I think it is a python or maybe a boa constrictor. I can't remember which. And it's longer than my arm span. And I have this thing on my shoulders, and I distinctly remember how heavy it felt. And that's all muscle. That is all, like if I hold up my own arm, it doesn't feel that heavy. And that's got way more bones and other tissue than a snake's body. I think I'm kind of speculating here. That is so much dense muscle just packed into this creature. It makes it extremely deadly. And so I look back in horror at this picture I have. I'm smiling, having a good time. I'm like, man, if that thing decided that it wasn't having it that day, it could have strangled me so quick. I see videos all the time online of people, snake trainers and people where the snake does wrap around their arm, and it takes 3 or 4 grown men to pry this thing off, and they are struggling. They're using tools. It is tough to get one of those snakes off. Where the heck was I going with this? Oh, that's right, getting eaten by snakes. Yeah, it seems ridiculous. Like you think, yeah, well, why would you just sit there and let it swallow you? But when you felt how strong a snake is, like it's kind of scary that something could probably, like if it was big enough, yeah, it could just hold you there. So yeah, that's a freaky way to go, I think. And we explore that in this story. Okay, so we can kind of let's jump ahead a little bit. There's not a ton of like deeper themes to look at with the rest of this story. There's a couple kind of open questions though, like do you think Greg the gecko escaped because Calvin left the cage door unlatched? Or do you think that was possibly some kind of telekinetic manipulation from Annie? We see the old woman smashing the glass jar. Annie breaks the light fixture. Annie controls the window. There seems to be something with glass in particular that they have a control over. So it's conceivable that Annie could have opened the cage from a distance, maybe. And in fact, everything leading up to Graham getting caught inside the house, or inside the window well, it kind of lends to this possibility of Annie manipulating the whole thing. Because we know, one, yes, she seems to have control over glass, but also she's got this power over her snakes. Maybe that extends to other reptiles or even other animals in general. And so, we could kind of conceive that maybe she then took over Greg. We don't really know how Greg got outside. So, I think personally as the writer, so you must take my word. No, you interpret it however you want, come up with your own theories. But in my mind, she is in control of Greg. She gets him outside through kind of like she's controlling him with like a remote control, like he's a little drone, and she finds a way to get him out of the house and then leads him to her house and kind of drags Graham along with him so that she can capture him. And the whole point is to get Graham upstairs and feed him to her snake. He's done with his father. And, small detail. I didn't put this in my notes. Completely forgot about it. There's this small detail of early in the story, there's this mention of the compost box that Mr. Darris built. And when Graham jumps the fence and he lands next to the compost box and he realizes it does not smell like what he's used to smelling. It doesn't have that fermented kind of, I think I say sweet and sour smell from the usual compost. It smells like sewage. And I just wanted to point that out and let you draw any implications that you would like from that. So anyway, back to where I was just at. So that's how her whole mission here is to get Graham upstairs, feed him to the snake, and that is when her mom steps in, puts her foot down, and she says, "No, that's enough. We're not doing this anymore," or at least she's not participating anymore. And you might at first see her actions when she goes into the room and essentially feeds herself to the snake. That might seem a little bit suicidal. It might seem like, a little dramatic maybe. But if you think about it, if that snake ate her, it couldn't possibly eat Graham for days. So, she's basically left Annie with this choice. She's got this kid now. She can either try to keep him captive for all this time, or she's going to have to let him go. So by doing that, this selfless act that this sick old woman does on behalf of this kid, by doing that, she basically makes it impossible for Annie to use him the way she wanted to. However far ahead the old lady thought, we will never know. We don't get to know. But you got to imagine she'd probably be somewhat aware, depending on how sick her mind was, how far gone she was, that if Annie has to let Graham go, Graham's going to tell people, and that'll be the end. That's it. So it's possible, if you want to believe, that she knew by feeding herself to this snake, she was ending this entire cycle, and this was not going to continue. She probably hated Annie, even though she was her daughter. She probably was so tired of being kept away from the world. We don't really go back to this scene of her sitting in the rain and eating out of this brown bag. We never find out what she's eating. That scene kind of contributes to this initial idea that maybe she's the witch, or that there's something sinister about her. But really, in hindsight, when you look back on that moment, one, she's clearly not all there. She's not in her right mind all the time. And two, maybe she went outside and is stuffing her face with whatever's in this bag because she just managed to escape from Annie for a little bit. And even though it's raining outside, she just wanted to get out of the house and she wanted to go sit in this swing. And weather be damned, she just went out there. maybe she stole whatever's in that bag from Annie. Maybe maybe Annie picked up we talk about the dark liquid running down her face and stuff, maybe looking like blood, but it's never confirmed, right? It could have just been like a jelly donut or something, or some blueberries. This poor old lady is just locked up in this house, and so she, for whatever reason, is able to get away, and she's just scarfing down whatever this food is in this bag before she's caught. I think looking back at the story, if you think back on that scene, that it kind of paints it in a new light, and you kind of see it differently, maybe closer to how Maggie looked at it in hindsight, when she was debating on whether or not she needed to get help for this lady. So those are kind of the big themes and moments in the story. Obviously, it wraps up with, there's one more kind of cool thing that I thought of actually as I was writing the notes for this. The old lady saves Graham twice in a way, because when he's escaping and Richie the snake crawls up his leg and comes after him, how he kills Richie is with the shard of glass that was from the jar that the old lady broke and is there. So indirectly, she kind of saves him a second time there. That was just more of a fun little thought that popped into my head. It wasn't really intentional or anything. So then, wrapping it up, Annie becomes known as the Snake Witch in prison. It says that her cellmates keep coincidentally getting hurt due to what we know about her powers. I think we can assume that she's doing things to cause that to happen. And then Maggie goes in and tries to give her kids a normal life after these horrific events. And she starts by buying them goldfish, which are normal little plain pets that can't go anywhere, won't hurt anybody. So there's a little bit of I don't know if it came across as much when I wrote it. In my mind, it was very humorous and lighthearted when she buys them the goldfish. It's supposed to be a little bit of a joke. Okay. Well, we were right on target for kind of how I figured this episode would go, so that's good. This would be the normal part of the episode where we do podcast updates. That's where I tell the patrons about anything going on behind the scenes, any exciting collaborations coming up, maybe some insight into upcoming stories. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about this because I do kind of want the patrons to be sort of exclusively in the know on this, but there's a whole blooming idea I have for the future of the Warning Woods, and some ideas and themes that I might start tackling, I think, after the new year. If you want to hear more about that, you'll have to listen to past In the Woods episodes. So you can either sign up for the free trial and check those out, or become a member of become a member of the Warned, which is my $4.99 Patreon tier, and then check those out. So I guess, since we have a huge Q&A, I'm going to keep this brief, but, everybody should be aware. I'm doing another Halloween special this year, as I've done every year of the Warning Woods. This will be the 4th Halloween special. I don't want to hype it up too much and get your expectations too high, but I do genuinely believe this is one of the scariest stories that I've written. It won't be as long as The Owl last year. I'm not going to turn it into a little novella like I did with The Owl, but I do really believe in the story. I think you're going to enjoy it. It feels very Halloween-y too. It has those kind of classic spooky vibes. So that's all I'll say about that. It's starting on Sunday, October 27th, and there will be an episode every single day until October 31st, Halloween, where we will wrap the story up. Halloween happens to fall on a Thursday this week, which is good because the Halloween special is going to take place of the normal weekly episode. I'm not going to do the Halloween special plus the normal story. Not because I don't think you all deserve it, but because I literally could not possibly get that done. There's no way. So they look forward to that starting Sunday, October 27th, and then an episode every day until Halloween. And they're all part of the same story. It's a 5-part story, just like in past years. Okay, So now the part that many of you may be waiting for, I'm going to check the timestamp so I can actually put that in the description in case anyone wants to just skip ahead to this. We're at about 40 minutes right here. All right, let's get into this. I'm going to start with the questions that I got from my beloved Patreon community, and then we'll move to the ones that I got from the rest of you on Instagram. And there is quite a variety here, so I'm excited to do this. I'm going to give my voice a quick break, take a drink. We'll get into it. Okay, I'm going to do my best to get your names and handles right. Apologies in advance if I don't. Perfect for this time of year. Nisi Nay asks, what is your ideal Halloween? Do you have a Halloween routine? I read those out of order, but that's the question. Well, my Halloween routine has been dramatically different over the last 5 years than it was before because I have a kid now. And I got lucky. My kid is very much into Halloween. She's not big into like scary stuff most of the time, but around this time of year, she gets really into like the fun, spooky kind of energy. She watches all these YouTube channels like Danny Go and stuff like that, and they usually start pumping out some Halloween content, some dances with little skeletons and ghosts or whatever. So Halloweens now are pretty much revolving around her. A lot more, kid-themed activities. We do a lot of the trunk or treat type stuff with different churches around town, do like parking lot trick-or-treating. So we usually kind of get her set up with like a couple different costumes she can pick from and go to those. Myself, I know I'm a grown man, but I still like to dress up for Halloween. It's kind of fun. I think this year I'm probably I'm leaning towards being Ash from Pokemon because my daughter's going to be Jigglypuff. And I, to be completely honest, do not have the mental energy to come up with a very creative costume this year. So she told me I should be Ash, and I said, yeah, maybe we'll do that. I basically have to get like a vest and a hat, and I'll be good. So that sounds simple enough. With kids, and my kid, I know what she can handle. I kind of know where her lines are. So I could probably do something that's a little bit creepy and just kind of, avoid crossing the line and freaking her out. But we do like to trick or treat with friends and stuff like that. And I don't really want to freak out my friends' kids or whatever. That's something to be aware of when you're a parent. So I will probably keep it very tame this year, do the usual trick or treat. But for the second part of this question, what is your ideal Halloween? That was last year's Halloween. And I don't think I'll be able to top it, to be completely honest. So last year on Halloween, just by chance, this amazing co-headlining tour with Chelsea Grin and Suicide Silence came to Des Moines on Halloween night. And so I went trick-or-treating with my daughter, took her out around town. We were out until like 7, and then I got in my car and I shot straight down to Des Moines. I'm in Ames, Iowa. I don't know if people know that. Ames is about 35 miles from downtown Des Moines. So hopped in my car, shot straight down to Des Moines, and walked into the venue as Suicide Silence was like a quarter of the way into their set. And then Chelsea Grin closed it out. Two of my favorite deathcore bands, two absolutely iconic deathcore bands. It was the perfect show for a Halloween night. Chelsea Grin dressed up as the Beatles, so that was fun. They came out all in wigs and suits. Very fun night. Couldn't ask for a better Halloween than that, personally. The only thing that probably would have capped it off is if I had gone home and watched like the original Salem's Lot or something like that. That's one of my favorite Halloween movies, but can't get it all, I guess. The concert ended around like 11. I probably got home around midnight. I was ready for bed. I think it was like a Tuesday night too. Anyway, that is probably my ideal Halloween. It'll probably never get topped. Who knows? We'll see. There are many more Halloweens to come, I'm sure. Kim Leckie asks, who are your favorite horror writers and or what's in your to-be read pile? Great questions. Okay. Let's start with the what's in my to be read pile, because that's kind of a simple question to answer. Obviously, like many of you, I'm sure, I have a ridiculously long list of books that I want to read. It's really not a formal list. In fact, if I open my Goodreads, which I'm doing right now, it's being very slow, so I'm talking at the same time, and I go to my want to read, there's a lot of books in here that I have put in here for no other reason than I'm trying to like remind myself of authors that I've read before and liked. And there's also some classics. Like I've never read The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. That's on my list. But then there's like books that I don't even know what they're about. 8 Perfect Murders by Peter Swanson, Before She Knew Him by Peter Swanson. The only reason those are there is because I read a book called The Kind Worth Killing by Peter Swanson, and it was very good. So I wanted to read more of his stuff. It's really more about the authors than the books, to be honest. There's a lot of books here I'm seeing too that I probably saw on like Reels or something like that, and I just added. There's Son of Rosemary by Ira Levin, which is the sequel to Rosemary's Baby. There are all of the 4 books after the first Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, because my friends and I read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy for our book club, and some of them have continued, and they've said the subsequent books are also very good. So I want to read those eventually. But really what I tend to do, I don't really go to my reading list when I'm looking for my next book. I kind of look at my bookshelf itself, because I pick up free paperbacks and stuff all the time at book sales and garage sales or whatever. Right now I'm reading Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut, which was one that I just picked up randomly. What else is on my to-read list? I have Ghost Stories of an Antiquary, which is the first M.R. James collection that he published. We'll talk about M.R. James more in a second here. I've got a whole pile right next to me actually here of Chuck Palahniuk books that I want to read. He's probably my favorite writer, Chuck Palahniuk. And he doesn't write horror in the sense that you're all probably thinking as fans of my show. But I think his stuff is also deeply disturbing on an emotional and physical level. So if you're into being just grossed out and weirded out, Chuck Palahniuk's books are excellent ways to do that. I also have most of Stephen King's books at this point. I'm missing like 3. And I've probably read a third of them, maybe. So there's a bunch there. But the problem I have with Stephen King is that I get burnt out on him. And if I read too much, I find that our styles are kind of similar enough, or maybe his style is just sort of down to earth enough that I very easily find myself kind of copying him. And his voice coming out of me does not seem authentic at all. I've had a couple stories where I've as I'm narrating them, I'm like, I know what I did here. I'm trying to be Stephen King. And I try to avoid that. So I do like one every now and then now. Last year, I binged the entire Dark Tower series. And that was kind of how I got my fill of Stephen King for that time. It took a while. Those are thick books. And there's, 8 of them? I think 7 or 8 of them. Anyway, so that's kind of my pile. As far as favorite writers, I mentioned M.R. James. Fantastic classic ghost story writer. I really, really enjoy his stuff. And what I should have prepared for this part a little better. I should have actual story titles for you to go check out some of their work. I will tell you this, I'll give you a podcast recommendation. Everybody who likes this podcast, go check out a podcast called Classic Ghost Stories. The guy, his name's Tony Walker. He narrates these stories like M.R. James, Henry James, Robert Aikman. He's done Shirley Jackson, Charles Dickens, Poe, all these classic horror writers and ghost story writers and those types of people. He does such a great job narrating this classic literature in a way that I'm not capable of. I tried for last Halloween, I think it was. I tried to narrate an Edgar Allan Poe story just for fun. And I gave up. It was so difficult to read through. And I love Poe. I read his stuff all the time, but reading it aloud was such a challenge. So I'm so impressed by what Tony Walker's doing at Classic Ghost Stories. Check that out. All of the authors that are all of the like classic ghost story writers that I'm inspired by, he's done stories by. And I just named a few of them. Henry James, M.R. James, who I don't believe are related at all. Shirley Jackson, of course, Haunting of Hill House, We've Always Lived in the Castle, The Lottery, of course. Let's see. With Henry James, I actually have one of his short books right behind me, The Turning of the Screw. Definitely check that one out. Great story. And Tony Walker has narrated it. So check that out if you want. And I said Chuck Palahniuk's probably my favorite. Obviously, I'm inspired by Stephen King. Who isn't? That's a writer. Clive Barker, The Hellbound Heart. Such a good book. Yeah, I'm sure there's others that I'm forgetting. I'll probably have to do an addendum to this question later, but we'll leave it there for now. Let's see, here we go. Let's go to Instagram now. Milkweed Butterfly asks a series of questions. What's some music you like? Favorite color? What got you into horror? And any horror tropes that scare you in particular? Let's take these one by one. What's the music you like? I am a metalhead through and through. I don't want to give you that answer that everybody gives. Oh, I listen to everything. I kind of do, to be honest. I'm a massive fan of Lana Del Rey, have been for a very long time. Lorde, what's some other like weird? I love Dave Matthews Band, John Mayer. There's there's a huge variety of the music that I like, but if I had to pick one genre, I would say metal in general. Specifically, I'm big into metalcore, classic metalcore, All That Remains, Atreyu, stuff like that. Also deathcore. I mentioned Chelsea Grin, Suicide Silence, Lorna Shore, Job for a Cowboy. There's so many fantastic bands. And I've been seeing a lot of them over the last couple of years. Huge fan. Death metal, big Cannibal Corpse fan, Aborted. I saw Dying Fetus and 200 Stab Wounds earlier this year. Those are two bands that I wasn't super familiar with that blew my minds. I have multiple minds, people. So yeah, that's kind of my scene. I'm a guitar player, and I think metal music is the most fun for me personally as a guitar player to play. You can be fast and loud and do all kinds of squealy nonsense. I don't know. There's something about metal that's just always spoken to me. As a kid, I would always kind of not even realizing what I was doing, trying to find like the heaviest stuff I could find. It was like Linkin Park and stuff like that at first. I found an Under Oath CD at the library, and that was like the first screaming music that I heard. And then I think it was August Burns Red after that. And that kind of kickstarted my journey into heavier, louder, crazier stuff. I could talk metal all day, so I'll leave that there. My favorite color, blue. What got you into horror? I have influences from very young, just from my parents. My mom and my dad were into scary movies and stuff like that. When I was fairly young, we watched Scream together. That was probably my first slasher. I don't know if that's necessarily what got me into horror. I've always been into darker stuff. My favorite book series growing up was the series of Unfortunate Events by Lemony Snicket. And while it's not horror, it's very much in the horror vein. A lot of just spooky, weird situations and things like that, characters that are very bizarre and creepy. And that's kind of like the vibe I stuck with. And it's weird because on the outside, I have this very outgoing, friendly, kind of chill personality, I think, personally. But yeah, I've just always liked, and I guess back to the music question too, while I like stuff that's more upbeat and fun, there's some Miley Cyrus songs that I really enjoy. The stuff that resonates with me personally is the darker, heavier stuff. And I don't have a good answer for why that is. It's not like some kind of, like, people assume, oh, you must be so angry and unhappy. It's like, no, honestly, sometimes when things are best in my life, that's still the music I'm listening to. I just find some kind of weird joy in that. It also applies to horror, like the Terrifier movies. Like, what kind of person thinks it's fun on a Friday night to sit down and relax and watch a woman get sawed in half? You know what I mean? It's like, That's crazy, right? That's insane. But I don't know. That's what I find interesting. And like I said, that goes way back to being a kid. So I guess, a series of unfortunate events was an early influence in that. I don't know. I wish I had a more specific answer, but I did watch a lot of, my parents kind of introduced me to a lot of horror movies, and then I had friends as I got older. One friend in particular who was much more into like the Rob Zombie body horror type stuff than I really ever even became. But he showed me a lot of stuff too. So I don't know. I just had family and friends that showed me things, and then I kind of developed my own taste from there. I think in like college, I discovered the A24 type stuff, more elevated horror. And I think it's safe to say that's kind of more of the direction I've gone in personally as a writer, for the most part, and not necessarily intentionally, but that's just kind of where I've found some comfort, in my own craft. Any horror tropes that scare you in particular? That changes, over time. And to be completely honest with you right now, I'm having a hard time finding anything that scares me. Maybe I'm desensitized. I've kind of stopped watching horror movies, and I'm wanting to go back. As we're getting closer to Halloween, I'm feeling a desire to go back. But I've been really enjoying watching a lot of like YouTube videos and stuff that are scary, and it's a lot of Ring doorbell footage and trail cams and dash cam footage and stuff like that of like real events, real things. And some of it might be manipulated or staged or whatever, but it feels more real. And that's what it takes anymore to really make me feel anything creepy, because I don't know. I don't want to be that guy that's like, oh, the movies are just terrible these days, but they kind of are. Like I don't even want to say which movie it was in case anybody here wants to check it out and might enjoy it. But there was a movie that came out earlier this year with a prominent rising actress, a horror movie. And I tried to get into it and I just couldn't. And I couldn't tell you why. It's, the acting wasn't bad. The script wasn't bad. The story wasn't bad. I just didn't find it that compelling or interesting. And that's been the case a lot of times when I try to check out horror movies and stuff lately. I feel like I've seen a lot of the good ones. I'm sure there's plenty out there that I still haven't seen. But as far as the tropes, I can't really tell you any that scare me in particular. I don't know if it counts as a trope. I guess the thing that has been really kind of living in my brain right now is the concept of being alone in the woods and finding a sign or hearing another person somewhere out there, and not really knowing exactly where they are, who they are, what their intentions are. That's pretty scary. That's I guess if I were to pick something right now, that's something that would scare me. And I kind of explored that with my story, The Hiker, specifically because that's kind of where my mind's been. Let's go on to another one here. Cheezosaurus_Tim asks, what was your favorite Halloween memory, costume, and or memory as a kid? Well, we kind of talked about my favorite Halloween memory. No, as a kid though. I was a ring wraith one time, which was significant because that was the first time my parents let me go as anything that was like scary. Ring wraith, if you don't know, from Lord of the Rings, they're like the horseman things. They're probably one of the scariest things from the movies. They did a really good job making them just super creepy. Yeah, that's probably my favorite Halloween costume. My mom made really good Halloween costumes when I was a kid. She made all kinds of stuff. So there's a bunch of fun ones to remember. That one just sticks out because it was like the first kind of creepy one. I have like vague memories, just general memories of like, we'd always call them harvest parties that my church would always put together. The youth group would put together these parties near Halloween or around Halloween they were Halloween parties, people, but they called them harvest parties because they didn't want to get into the spooky spirits or, whatever. But if we were being honest, they were Halloween parties, and I had a great time at those. A lot of hay rides and bonfires and that sort of stuff. I love fall because of all those things. So that's got to be up there. Sorry, my voice is really, really running out of steam here, so I'm trying to wrap these up quickly now before I have to stop entirely. Oh no, and this is a huge question. I'm going to do my best. Okay, Cindra Ray McLean. I'm not sure. It's a handle. It's all one. It's all blended together. I'm assuming she asks, I'm super curious as to how you come up with your stories. Is it the same process or is it just whenever it strikes? Your variety is the best part of the podcast. Well, thank you for that. I do make an effort to add variety and keep things interesting for you. And I don't just do that for you. I think I would probably have a really boring podcast if I decided like, oh, I'm going to write ghost stories or I'm going to write monster stories. I think I'd probably run out of ideas, which kind of also plays into the first part of this question, how you come up with the stories. I've talked about this ad nauseum to the patrons. So if you're a patron, go ahead and skip ahead a few seconds. I'm sure you've heard this before. I have in my notes app on my phone this folder that just says The Warning Woods. And anytime I have the slightest inkling of an idea, it might be a story title, it might be a concept for a character or a monster or something like that. It might be a situation. And oftentimes it's just one sentence. Anytime something like that pops into my head, I put that in the notes. And then if I continue to think about it and more develops, I'll write that in there too. So I have this combination of like some notes literally have one word, some have a sentence, some have an almost complete story outline. It just depends on how much energy and time I had to dedicate to that idea at the time that I had it. So that is the part when you say, is it the same process or just whenever it strikes? The whenever it strikes part is where the ideas come from. And then I just have to make sure I actually put those ideas in writing on my phone, or if I don't have my phone on me, in some form, I have to get that idea out. I've been driving before and I'll record a voice memo or something like that, so that I have it there for whenever I'm ready to start the next story. If I waited for inspiration to strike to write the stories, there is no way I would be able to do a weekly story. You might get like one a month. I'll tell you what, this last couple weeks in particular, as I've been in this weird spot where historically I've always been like a couple weeks ahead on the podcast. So if I was burnt out or if I was sick like I've been for the last couple of weeks, I could just take a couple days off to recover and not have to force myself to write. I don't have that option right now at all. I am right up to the wire. I mean, I recorded this week's story on Tuesday morning and it comes out Tuesday night for the patrons. I'm recording this right now, Tuesday morning. So I am really out of wiggle room. And because of that, I have to have this disciplined daily routine. And what I've found is it's not really that hard to sit down and write when you're just used to doing that. When every day at the same time I wake up in the morning and I sit down with my cup of coffee in front of the computer, when that's just what I do, it kind of just happens. I don't really have to think about it that hard. Now, the quality isn't always the same. Sometimes I am kind of forcing the story out, but that's why you have a second draft, right? That's why you don't expect the story to be perfect on the first draft. In fact, I'm going to read ahead real quick here. Yeah. So someone actually replied to this question from Cindra Ray McLean. Procaffeinated came here to ask the same question. I'd love to see the creative process, maybe what drafts look like. I'm going to answer both of these questions kind of at once because that really, you can't answer one without answering the other, basically. So when I sit down, I don't put an expectation on myself when I'm writing the first draft that the writing is going to be outstanding, that this is going to be some mind-blowing story, this is going to be the most original thing anybody's ever heard. I just pick the best idea I have to work with at the time, the one that when I'm going through those notes in my phone, the one that kind of stands out is like, oh, that's something I could work with right now with where my mind is at and how I'm feeling emotionally. This topic, whatever it is, that's the one I want to tackle. And then, yeah, like I said, there's just no pressure on that first draft. All I'm trying to do is get the story out. I'm trying to learn who the characters are, because that might be a misconception, I think, about writing, that the author like picks who these people are. To some extent you do at the beginning, but as you write, you kind of figure out different things that you might not have thought of on your own. that just sort of play out as the story develops. And so that's what the first draft is for in my mind. It's for discovering the characters, kind of unlocking the setting, and then it's also a way to start picking up on ideas you would not have had just sitting and thinking about it as you're typing it out. And maybe in your mind, you're thinking, I'm going to have this person, I'll just pick a random action. This person is going to open the door at this point in the story. And then you get to that point in the story and you realize it doesn't make sense for this person to open the door. It makes sense for them to go down the stairs or whatever, And so then it kind of gives you a chance to reevaluate the rest of the story, where you're going. And oftentimes, my better stories are stories where that's happened. This one is no exception to that. I'm talking about the Snake Witch. I had, like I said earlier in this episode, a complete outline, one of the most complete outlines I have had for a story recently. And I still ended up abandoning most of it because I had just a better idea. A new track opened up and I followed it, and I ended up with this story that I'm very happy with and very proud of. So that's kind of how the process can vary from story to story, but also remains exactly the same in terms of like the daily routine is always consistent. I always wake up in the morning and I write for usually about an hour before I go work out. And then at night before I go to bed, my daughter tends to go to bed around like 8:39. That's when I sit down again. I write for another hour or so, and then I go to bed. So as long as I keep that consistent, if I keep that schedule and I keep myself accountable to showing up every day to write, and it is every day. Even when I do have wiggle room, there's rarely a day off. I find it very easy to get into the rhythm of writing very quickly, just because my mind and body know what we're there to do. Real quick, Procaffeinated also said, what did the drafts look like? The first draft, not good, ever. I don't think I've ever gone to do the second draft and read through the whole thing and been like, you know what? I changed a couple spelling errors, but the rest of it's good. There are usually dramatic changes that happen between the first and second draft. Not necessarily story changes, like the events are most likely all the same. But the second draft is when I have more energy to think about individual sentences, individual word choices, maybe tweaking the dialogue to help it feel more realistic. When I don't have the pressure of trying to figure out what's happening next or how to get my characters to the next scene or plot point, without that pressure, I have a lot more energy to focus on the artistic details of the story. So the second draft is really where it gets polished. And then the third draft I have pulled up as I'm recording the story so that if I catch any, usually like grammatical errors or typos, like I frequently, for some reason, and this might be an autocorrect thing that I'm not noticing, a lot of times when I mean to write she, I wrote the, just stuff like that. As I'm reading it aloud, reading and speaking at the same time, I'll catch those things more easily than when I'm just sitting reading quietly. So that's when I usually edit the third draft. However, what you are hearing is basically the second draft. The third draft, I make the edits just in case I want to do a printed form of it, or for the PDF that goes with the Patreon episodes, to make sure that everything is correct there. So yeah, that's kind of that whole process. Well, everybody, if you're still sticking around, thanks for listening. Thanks for checking out this extended Q&A. This has been fun. Good questions, everybody. Maybe we'll do this again sometime. Maybe we'll just do like the occasional Q&A episode. We'll see. But if you are interested in hearing something like this every week, to accompany the weekly stories, consider signing up at patreon.com/thewarningwoods. For $4.99 a month, you get the weekly story you always get, but you get it about a day and a half early, without any ads. And you can set it up too, so where if you're using Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever, the ad-free, you can set it up so the ad-free episodes do get fed into your podcast app, so you don't have to do anything extra. It's just there like a normal podcast, but without any ads. And then this bonus episode will also do the same thing. It's in the same feed. So when I publish this, which is usually actually, I don't think it's ever not been, it's at the same time that the story comes out. you can then, if you set up that feed, if you connect it to your podcast app, you'll get the weekly story without ads plus the bonus episode in your podcast feed. So it's not really any extra work to seek those out and find them. But yeah, check it out, patreon.com/thewarningwoods. There's a 7-day free trial if you just want to test it out and see if it's something you want to sign up for. For those of you who are already loyal patrons and who've been supporting me, thank you so much as always. I appreciate you very much. Thank you for sharing this bonus episode with the entire audience. I know it's something that you pay for, but this week I just wanted to share it with everybody in the spirit of spooky season. And as we've had so many new listeners showing up, I want to introduce them to the other things that we're doing here at the Warning Woods. And that's really all I have today. So I will get to work on the Halloween special. Look forward to that. Starting Sunday, October 27th. And next week, I don't know what the story's going to be about. I am going to have to figure that out tonight. So look forward to a mystery story next week. All right, everybody. Take care.